Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I hope you all had a good week. I was just telling Andy over here off camera that my day was lousy. So let's just say I'm really excited to be able to do a little bit of this tonight. So Andy, I hope you're doing all right.
You know it.
Yep. We're going to be going back to the Marvel Ultimate Journey, which, just in case you haven't checked out what Ultimate Journey is, there will be a link to the playlist in the box below. We are now going back to the road to Jonathan Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars. And we started at a very interesting point, even though there was plenty that we could have done a little bit prior, but we're trying to really think hard as to what some of the more important pieces to the story that led to Secret Wars is. But there's no way that we can leave this specific one out because it is it's practically joined at the hip to Brian Michael Bendis's House of M. And that, of course, is the follow-up directly, which is the story of Decimation. We basically found that at the end of House of M, Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlett Witch, said those three very important words, which are now iconic in all of Marvel history, and that is no more mutants. Well, now we're living in a world where there are only 198 mutants alive on the planet Earth. That doesn't mean that all the people that were mutants officially dropped dead. No, they are still alive, but they don't have powers. Some of them may actually be mutants that you know and love, and some of them may even be the ones that you love to hate. But it all starts with a great beginning called House of M the Day After, and there's no surprise why I will say this is probably my favorite book in the series because of the fact that it is written by none other than the great Chris Claremont. That's the main reason why I love this book so much. But I will say, Andy, that I don't think that this specific story really has the of House of M. And I think it's probably because of the fact that it's just, if you really want to see it, it's a very little of a core story. And there's just so many tie-ins, and not all of them are very much connected. They're interesting to read. I'll probably give some recommendations towards the end of the video, but it still is a story that does hit home because this is the X-Men that, like, you've never seen them before.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I mean, look, we're talking about our Marvel Ultimate Journey here, and I'm not going to assume that anyone watching this video has seen all of our videos, all of our other Ultimate Journey stuff. But for those who have, and for you, Steve, I actually felt very similarly about this story to how I felt when we last spoke on the DC side on Emerald Twilight, because this is a very this this is a major story that has the energy of an interlude to it, right? And what I mean by that is, look, in its very title, the branding is House of M Decimation, right? Like, this is the quintessential aftermath kind of story arc. And while it's enjoyable to read, it is so completely and like irrevocably tied to House of M that it's not one. If someone was like, hey, what are the best X-Men stories ever told? It's like, oh, you got to read Decimation. No, it would be like, you got to read House of M and like keep going to Decimation because you probably want to see like how everyone reacts to what happened in House of M, right? So it's a story that I judge kind of differently. It doesn't have the same peaks of House of M, but we are in an extended falling action of that story right now, right? So even though there isn't anything as emotional, gut punchy as No More Mutants, like, you still get to see how these characters that we know and love deal with either a loss of their own power, the loss of powers of people they love, just the general shift in society around what this balance of power of mutants means. So I did find, particularly in where we're starting here, the day after, with the beauty of Chris Claremont's writing. I did find there to be some true emotional moments and some great reading. So, look, broad strokes, is this as good as House of M? No, but like it just was never gonna be, and that's like kind of like a difficult, comparison. Um, but it's a very important story. I think it's
Yes.
rewarding. It's rewarding to someone who reads House of M, and as we will go into as we do the rest of what we read, it is important to the broader journey that we're on outside of House of M, which is focused on Secret Wars.
Yeah,
So,
I will say one of the best words to describe House of M the day after, it's very bold.
mm-hmm,
There are some moments in this book, because I will tell you, when I started catching up in comics and I heard about Decimation, hearing the whole idea of what the aftermath of House of M was, I gotta say, it made me very unsettled. And this is
mm-hmm,
even before reading the story itself. I'm like, really? There's like only 198 mutants left in the world? Like, that's so terrifying. It's like, you know about the X-Men story that started with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1963, and we have seen the mutants thrive even under the pressures of everything from discrimination to death threats. But as time went on, one of the things that we never really got an opportunity to go deeper into was the fact that mutant population was growing. And the fact that when I know that we mentioned this specific story when we first started our ultimate journey on the Marvel side, we talked about Grant Morrison's E is for Extinction, where Genosha got wiped out. And the fact that there were over 1 million mutants living in that island, just think about it, 1 million plus mutants. The mutants had come such a long way to be hit by such a monster brick. And then just through the uses of dark magic to just get kicked while you're down. It makes your heart hurt a little bit. And I mean, I think the first thing that you see, which is so gut wrenching, is the fact that one of the mutants that loses their powers is none other than Fred Dukes, aka the Blob.
mm-hmm,
And the way that Chris Claremont decided what would happen if the Blob lost his powers, well, you see it. And he's basically turned into the Scream by Edvard Munch. It's
mm-hmm,
scary, but I think the part that's even more gut wrenching is the fact that he's literally in prison and the guards busted in because they heard him screaming, and then they see him and he's literally asking them to kill him.
mm-hmm,
Like, that is sad,
mm-hmm.
even for a villain like the Blob.
Yeah, it's a very arresting story. Now I'm gonna forget if it was in this issue or a bit further on when we get to 198, but just because it's relevant to what you're talking about here. I mean, it's an unsettling story. It's a powerful story. I understand, when you're reading even the concept of it, like the unsettling feeling you get. I mean, we have the scene where Kitty is saying, "So this is a concentration camp." Is what this
Oh yeah,
is,
that's the
you
198.
know?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk
And
about
that's,
that.
yeah, I think that's in 198, but it's like that's all talking about the kicking them when they're down and how far the mutants like have fallen, have been hurt. It's like, all right, they have been genocided, right? They have been erased, and now they have been contained in truly, truly inhumane ways that like underscores that less than human treatment that they receive from the government in the Marvel universe. Um, and so it's a very troubling story, but it is one that I think is really well done. And it's painful to see because good Lord, I mean, you remember when we were talking about House of M, like I felt it, and I know other readers feel it, like the welling, like that tightness in your throat, that feeling behind your eyes when you read No More Mutants with all the history of Marvel Comics behind it. And then we see this, and it's like, well, there's 198 mutants still, but also the way they are now forced to live is so terrible. It's just going to be gut punch after gut punch after gut punch, and it's a hard one. It's a hard one.
Yeah, we read a little bit further on in this one specific starting point where you see some of the famous faces in the world of X-Men and the world of Marvel's Mutants world. Like, you see some of the strongest minds literally breaking, particularly the White Queen, Emma Frost. Like, you couldn't, I mean, one of the few things that you gotta say that Chris Claremont was so on the money about was he knew how to write extremely strong women, mutant or none. I mean, we
Mhm.
take a look at mutants like Storm and Shadowcat and the White Queen, and we even take a look at characters like Moira McTaggart and Lilandra, or even Valerie Cooper, who is in this story as well.
Mhm.
But Chris Claremont knew how to write women well, very well. And that's also one of the main reasons why Louise Simonson herself believes that that's why Chris Claremont's X-Men run sold so well, because he
Mhm.
just knew how to write women so well as men.
Can I
But
tell you one character that comes to mind as you
sure,
say that gets a very small but moment that lingers with me greatly from this one shot
uh-huh.
is Jubilee.
Yeah,
I mean, I think she gets a page and a half, maybe
yep.
it's 2 pages, but it's one of the bigger like moments of my heart just sinks as I read the page of like where she was, where she is, and like the setting of it. It's beautifully sad.
Well,
I'll
it's
put it
also
that way.
well for me. It hit me twice as hard because Jubilee happens to be one of my favorite X-Men. I love,
Same, same. I love Jubilee.
and that's because of the animated series. Jubilee
Yeah,
was
no,
written
same. But
beautifully for the young kids that watch the show. I mean,
yeah, no, I love Jubilee.
when they finally made her Funko Pop, I screamed with delight. I'm so glad to have
Yeah.
a Jubilee Funko Pop. But yeah, you're right. She's another character that really goes into it, and then of course you get back to what happened to Bobby Drake, who is my favorite X-Men of all time, Iceman, about how he's trying to look at it from a different perspective, about how he's hurting on the inside, but he's trying to not show it on the outside. Because it's like there are all these moments, because one of the big events that takes place towards the end of the book is all of a sudden a bunch of sentinels descend upon the X mansion, and Bobby is going out there to try and fight and try and help. And they're like, Bobby, what are you doing? You don't have powers. Like, I'm still an X-Man. Like
Mhm.
that's powerful because he still believes that mutant or not, these are my people. This is my family. And I think that that's why this book in particular is the best one, because
Mhm.
it's all very character based. It's all showing, even during the toughest of times, you got to fall back on the people that you know, the people that you care about, your family. That's where the whole concept of this mutant family that we've known for so many years, even with all the new students that have come into this mansion over the years, how they still feel that they're a part of it, even though some of them don't have powers and they end up having to go home. Like, some of them don't even really want to leave because this is where their friends
Yeah.
are.
And then, I'm thinking of Bobby, like one of the moments that sticks with me the most from that book is there's the scene where he's handling calls from the parents,
Yep.
right? And there's this one particular call he gets from parents who are essentially disappointed that their kid is still one of the
Yeah.
freaks. It's
Yeah.
like, you're telling me that everyone lost their powers and my kid's like the only one who isn't normal, and he like breaks the headset and he's like, I
Yeah.
can't, and just there's so much going on in that scene. There's obviously the loss of his own powers. There's
Yep.
obviously the way it puts it forth, like the idea that mutants will never be accepted no matter what happens, even if they lose their powers, because he's being this representative for the mutant organization. There's the hate that he feels towards the idea of parents turning away from their kid, even one that you might think like, they're calling in not to check, but to call in and be like, oh, he's still a freak, damn, and hang
Mhm.
up. And it's just that moment really sticks with me because he says he's taking these calls as the distraction from all the pain he's suffering himself. But then that's such an impactful and horrible thing to need to hear from someone who is a parent of presumably someone that Bobby would care about very much, because they are a family, the people
Mhm.
who come to the mansion. So
And so we mentioned Valerie Cooper because after we finish the day after, we get into the other three issues that are part of the core story, and it's the X-Men issues 177 through 179. Now, just so everybody knows, there's a lot of different X-Men volumes, and this is the one that was started with Chris Claremont and Jim Lee back in 1991. Also, X-Men #1. Volume 2 was still to this very day the highest grossing comic book of all time. I still can't get over
Mhm.
the fact that this book still holds that record. It's a
Yep.
great book, though. But so now the author is no longer Chris Claremont. We get Peter Milligan, who is someone who I was very much aware of. I know Peter Milligan's writing. He is relatively good. And of course, X-Men fans get the thing that they always love to see, the Sentinels descend on the X-Mansion, and Wolverine draws his claws, and he's ready to fight them. But then they find out that these are not your average Sentinels. And the fact that Valerie Cooper, who is, she's a character that's been around for quite some time. How do you describe her? Is she an ally to the X-Men? Is she an enemy of the X-Men? Because she's really not concrete black and white. She's basically someone who is working for the government and trying to work on mutant affairs. That's basically
Yeah.
what Valerie Cooper has done throughout the history of her being in the comic books.
That's a good way to put it. And I think if there's something that can be said to have her lean towards like the ally side of the spectrum, and here's the problem we're going to run into. These next three issues bleed in with the 198 so
Very much so.
directly that I worry about talking about a moment there a little early. But the her higher ups are unable to be completely truthful with her, knowing that she is going to be truthful with the mutants about anything that she knows because of the relationship that she has with the X-Men. I think that the reason that that pushes her towards the ally column, aside from just the truth of it, is you get the sense that the reason for that is she would be honest due to a sense of morality. She would not be able to lie to them even for their benefit in that moment. She
Right.
feels too much of a kinship to them and wants to preserve that relationship. And the fact that she wants to preserve that relationship in this moment puts her closer to them. We'll put
Yeah,
it that way, even though obviously she represents people who do not have their best interests at heart.
there's even a moment in this book, I believe, that goes far back into the history of X-Men, where that famous reporter that sort of had a relationship with Beast early in the mid
Mm-hmm.
1980s, how she even comes into the story and she even tries to contact the mansion asking how's Hank doing. It's like it's such it's nice to see that even on the outside there are people that know that this is a rough time for the mutant community, and yet they still don't know how to approach this.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. And it's one of those nice moments that continues to draw upon the rich history of Marvel and the X-Men too, to make that kind of impactful thing, that extended hand of, but you don't actually know what the mutants are going through because this is such a unique kind of struggle. Um, but that was a wonderful moment in the book as well.
Yeah,
And one of the
so
people who, just thinking through who the 198 mutants are who retain their powers, one of the people who it's Hank retaining his powers like more frustrating than some of the others. I mean, there are characters who retain their powers who their powers cause them a lot of difficulty in their day-to-day life, and he's one of them. And of course
yeah,
he's one of the ones who gets to keep his power. The other being Rogue, it comes to mind kind of chiefly, but
yeah, so we have two very strange events take place in these couple of volumes, and there's even a third one thrown in there. There is the fact that the Sentinels are revealed to be the Sentinel Squad 1, a branch of the government that is now officially Valerie Cooper's responsibility. And they keep saying that there are these Sentinels, there are human beings piloting them. These are not the Sentinels that are basically saying destroy all mutants or halt mutants or anything that you know what Sentinels are. But these specific Sentinels are now officially surrounding the X Mansion for the purposes of protection. At the same time, it's so interesting because you can relate this to like what's going on in the world today with the refugee crisis. The fact that all of a sudden the X Mansion is being bombarded by so many mutants that still have their powers and they're looking for a sanctuary because the big problem is with only 198 mutants out there, it's open season. So you've got the Sapien League out there. You've got Friends of Humanity. You even have a Striker who actually ends up doing something even worse. It's not in these specific books.
Mhm.
I'll get into that a little bit later. But long and the short of it, we see characters like the Morlocks, and even characters that I'd never seen before in my life. Like I never heard of Max. Like I had no
Mhm.
idea who this character was. But the
Mhm.
fact that we now see the X-Men getting hit in two different ways, the fact that there is now government here trying to claim that they're helping us, whereas there are now mutants coming to us because they need a place to be safe, and they still do not feel safe now that there's sentinels running around. And then there was the other big thing that was going on, and that's the story of Lorna Dane, aka
Mhm.
Polaris. The fact that she is basically exactly the opposite, I think, of what's going on with Bobby. Like, she is not showing it on the surface that she's not even revealing the fact that she even lost her powers. And yet she is still like not as vocal as she should be, even when she's trying to hide the fact that she lost her powers. The X-Men pretty much knew she lost her powers, and she didn't even have to tell them. But again,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to see how each character is coping with this specific event.
Yeah. And I think the way that she copes with you're exactly right to talk about the foiling with how Bobby deals with it. Um and obviously how should I put this? We see through Bobby how the X-Men remain his family. And when he runs out there knowingly without powers, it's like, look, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I am here and I'm standing with these people, and I'm not going to stand by on the sidelines because that's not who I am. He's not his powers, he's him, right? And and I think that's the contrast we see, that it ends up not being her powers, but at the same time that there's fear, right? And you understand why there would be fear in losing your powers. I mean, they all feel it's just different lenses of how people are coping with the same kind of loss.
And then when we get to the end of the X-Men piece, Polaris basically decides that she needs to leave, and Havoc joins her as well. And he still has powers. But another very interesting thing takes place. Emma manages to figure out how Bobby could get his powers back. It's such a weird thing. Like I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It's the fact that he didn't lose his powers. It's the fact that no More Mutants apparently made the X gene dormant, specifically in him, because when Emma Frost awakens his powers and says the only reason why you couldn't find your powers is because you didn't believe that you could reawaken them. And out of nowhere, he just manages to do it, and it actually makes him a little bit more powerful. But then, of course, the whole thing is Emma is not happy about the fact that this is happening because she doesn't believe that this is the case for everybody.
And I think it's possible that I'm just straight up wrong. Okay, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because it's possible I read it wrong. And as we continue in the journey and I read a little bit more of this, since I'm not as familiar with this story, I'll discover, because I'm doing it live, right? I'll discover that I'm wrong about. But the way that I read what that was, last your gene was dormant and you could choose to awaken it. So much as it was, Bobby had such a complicated relationship with his powers that in the world where suddenly everyone lost his powers, he wanted to believe that he was one of the people who lost his powers so much that he repressed them to the point of not appearing, right? And in my reading of it, and again, maybe this is wrong, in my reading of it, what happened was when he was given the strong reminder, oh no, you do have them, like they came rushing back like that. And I mean more of like the flip, right? And giving him, new, like you said, they come back stronger than before, and starts to give him like a deeper understanding of what his powers are and how they work. um but to me, that was how I was reading that. It was less, here's evidence of the path that everyone can take to get their powers back kind of story, and more evidence of, shit, Bobby, you got a complicated relationship with being a mutant, which is putting it lightly, as fans of the comics would know. Um, so that's again, that was my personal reading of what that scene
I,
was.
that's what makes this story so important. I think it's just because of the fact that you can perceive it however you want to perceive it. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's really
Yeah.
what it is. And I think that that's what makes this
Mm-hmm.
story, again, not the best X-Men story out there, but definitely a very powerful one. And then I can just say that before we get into the next piece of this, which is another one of the, which is actually the only tie-in that we read, let me also just say that now that we've officially gone through what is known as the core issues, there's a real great deal of tie-ins that you can read if you want to see this story from different perspectives. You want to learn more about the Sentinel Squad 1 and who they are and what they're all about. There's a 5-issue miniseries for that. There's also a tie-in called The Son of M, because one of the few things that we did not mention was one of the things that we saw in House of M the day after was Quicksilver basically looking like a bum on the streets, like saying, I just wanted everybody to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's that was a very powerful thing. So Son of Them, you can see his whole story and how he copes with it. There's also a very interesting tie-in called Generation M, and each issue goes into one of these specific mutants that lost their power. So Generation M1 is about Chamber from Generation X. Generation M2 is about Jubilee. Generation M3 is about the Blob, so on and so forth. There's also a bunch of other tie-ins from Peter David's new X Factor run, which is, I don't really remember this one that much. There's some very interesting Uncanny X-Men tie-ins. There's some interesting Wolverine tie-ins. And I probably will say the best tie-in is probably New X-Men, because it involves what William Stryker decides to do with his cult of human freedom fighters, and it can be very, very dark at some points in time. It's New X-Men 20 to 23. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
also X-Men Deadly Genesis, which is written by Ed Brubaker, who is a great writer. I don't really understand how this is specifically tied in with Decimation, but I will definitely say that it is a very interesting story regardless. It's all about Vulcan, the third Summers brother, which I found quite
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. The only other thing that I want to say before we get into the 198 is we still have no idea where Charles Xavier is.
Yeah. that is a big question mark looming over this whole aftermath.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how this time they barely even acknowledge him in this whole
Mm-hmm.
story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think from all of these side stories that you mentioned, there's a few of them that are of interest to me that I might dive into in the time we have before we get to our next, larger part of the journey. We'll see. Um, but yeah, if you have further thoughts, but I think a big part of the reason that we're doing this at all is because of the 198.
Yeah, the 198 basically is a 5-issue miniseries that gives us a little more of an understanding of the purpose of Sentinel Squad 1 and a little bit more of the development around the characters thinking about this. Because basically, Valerie Cooper is saying to the mutants, we are here to help you, but we're going to build a wall around you, and we're not going to let you leave the mansion grounds because of the fact that we don't want you to deal with the danger out there. We're going to put chips in you in case you want to leave the campus. We're going to give you cell phones in case you, God forbid, need our help, and we'll be there right away. And not everybody is happy with this. I mean, I'm really surprised that there was anybody that was even remotely okay with it. But you said it earlier today, the one who really gets miffed by this is Kitty.
Yeah.
And she basically feels as if the mutants are basically put in a ghetto, aka or a concentration camp. And being a Jewish girl, this is very unsettling to her. And even though Valerie Cooper is constantly saying, no, 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 we're not going to do this. And then I think one of the, again, it's a very bold thing to put in comics, but I still remember the line where she says, "What's next? Communal showers."
Yeah.
That was, I was like, rereading that again, I was like, whoa, I
It's rough.
completely forgot about
It's
that.
it's rough. And I think you know, I alluded to that scene earlier, so clearly it lingers with me too. Um, it's warranted. Look, sometimes the X-Men wears this the series wears its inspiration on its sleeve quite a bit. You could call that scene a little on the nose, but I think we're doing something really important there by kind of talking about these dangers of othering people who are not like you and letting fear outweigh seeing the common humanity between people. I mean, this is the X-Men bread and butter, right? And so occasionally you're going to have really, you know, I mean, in a book that has such important and far-reaching themes about what it means to be human, you're going to get some stuff like that that's going to be a little unsettling to read at times, but it's warranted, it's powerful, and it's quite frankly tasteful, regardless of what anyone who still doesn't understand that comics are art might want might want to say. But it's quite purposeful, and like I said, clearly lingers with me because this is not the first time I have talked about this broader scene, even in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, but there's also some other interesting things at work there. There's actually mutants behind the scenes that are trying to make Tempers flare, and they're very unusual characters to me. I'm still, you know, these were characters that I don't know what actually happened to them later on in the world of X-Men, but we had Mr. M and we
Yeah.
also had Danny D. Danny D is without a doubt one of the freakiest things
Weird.
that I've ever experienced. And I
Weird.
still don't, I gotta be honest with you, maybe that's why I feel a little bit weird about Decimation, but I don't understand his motive in this story at all.
No, I mean, look, I
I
don't,
don't.
at the very least in the vacuum of this story, I don't. And it's part of the reason why people talk about House of M. They don't talk about House of M Decimation. But like, I think if anybody takes anything away from our discussion, it's that I think if you love House of M, it's worth reading the one shot for the day after. I think 198 is important for the context of where we're going with our Secret Wars journey. But if you're not doing our journey with us, but for some reason watching these videos, you know, the core of the story is to be found outside of this limited series. This is a limited series to do the work of selling you on upcoming storylines. Um, I was not particularly thrilled by the 198 in any unique way to recommend it on its own outside of
Yeah.
broader context. And I think what you're talking about character motivation, since the draw of Decimation is character. Everything we talked about in the core issues from volume 2 of X-Men, the main, the 197 through 199, and the one shot is about how the events of House of M impacted an individual character. It's character scenes, talking about Jubilee without her powers, talking about Bobby losing them, gaining them back, talking about, you know, Kitty, as we were just saying, the fallout of what's happening to everyone here. And then 198 is kind of like, we're going to add some characters to the foreground that you don't care about as much. They're going to be relevant later. Some writers want to use them. And this is the way that we pull them in. them into the universe, which like it's comics, right? Like it happens. That's how comics work. So
Yeah,
I can't shit on him too much for it. Okay, you
no.
know.
I mean, I did appreciate Mr. M's motivation. I mean, Mr. M was basically one of those people that said, yes, there is dangerous stuff out there, but we need to be who we are. We need to show the world that we're not afraid, regardless of what has happened in our diminished numbers. And I really did appreciate him for who he was and how he basically stood up to everyone from the mutants to the government, basically saying, we will live on whether you like it or not. It's just our decision on how we want to live in this situation.
Hmm. Yeah, my critique is really towards Danny D.
Yeah, I
Primarily to
don't
make it
I
to make
didn't
that
get him. I
clear.
just didn't get him.
Yeah. That's more the critique. But yeah, I think we are on the same page with Mr. M.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what decimation is. And I think the right thing to explain here is, even though it sounded like we weren't as enthusiastic about it, know that the reason why decimation is so essential is for the upcoming stories in the ultimate journey. And believe me, one of the few places that we are going to go in this journey is going to be the Messiah trilogy. And it's very important that we read that trilogy because it's so essential to the aftermath of decimation. Because one of the things that is now on the plate of the X-Men is, even though there's only 198 of us out here now, what is our future? Are we going to be the last mutants, or are there going to be more mutants in the future? Like, will our species in fact live on? And that's basically how it's going to lead to stories that are extremely essential, like the Messiah trilogy and like Avengers versus X-Men, which basically goes right in to the road to Secret Wars. But for now, I'm sorry if you guys feel a little unfulfilled with this discussion, but trust me, the ultimate journey has only just begun. And we are looking forward to the next chapter in our Marvel Ultimate Journey. But of course, the next time we have an Ultimate Journey discussion, you will be seeing us discussing the road to Blackest Night once again, which we are always excited for. But we're excited for this too.
Isn't it funny that we've caught two episodes on both sides of the journey with these kind of like interlude stories? It's just funny how the stories balance out like
Well,
that. That
I'm
we have kind of our shorter Emerald Twilight, our shorter 198 like decimation kind of thing.
yeah,
It says, but that's part of the journey, right? So like this is all part of the fun. Not everything is going to be a major event. Some things are going to be these side stories that inform the major events along the way in service of the greatest ultimate thing we're building to. So I think it goes to show the value of these journeys that we're taking is these side stories that we explicitly read to inform the big core stories that you can read on their own. But the entire thing we're trying to show is how much thought has gone into these big, massive stories we're leading to, and all of the little machinations and moving cogs that led to them being as wonderful as they are. So
absolutely.
I think that's great that this is where we're at.
Absolutely. And it just makes our video recording so much more easier because there's not that much to read every time.
That's true too. It doesn't always have to be a 300
Yeah,
page
because
omnibus.
seriously, if I had to read like 40 issues before each episode, I'd probably go insane and stop with the next episode. I'm
Not
only
that it
I'm only
won't
one
happen at least
person.
once or twice, but like, yeah.
I mean, seriously, we haven't quit our day jobs and we don't plan on it. So
Yeah.
I think the way that we're going through this is the right way to go.
Yeah. Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Well, thank you very much for watching, everybody. Leave a comment in the box below, leave a like, and don't forget to hit subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest videos. And we will see you guys on another episode of The Ultimate Journey. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.